He walked in, covered in grease and sweat, the afternoon sun clinging to his back like a second skin. His black t-shirt was faded, his hands calloused, and the only thing he carried was a worn set of keys and a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. No name tag, no watch, no briefcase, just the simple question as he nodded toward the glossy new pickup parked out front. How much for the truck? The sales team barely looked up. To them, he was just another laborer, another working man in over his head, someone they could ignore, redirect, or dismiss with a smirk. What they didn't know was that beneath that oil-stained shirt stood Marcus Holloway, the CEO of Swift Logistics, visiting his own dealership under the radar to see how his people treated the kind of customers most folks overlook. But as he reached for his wallet, ready to drop a cash deposit, a voice rang out behind him. Sharp, entitled, and dripping with disdain. "You're not actually selling him that truck, are you?" He turned slowly, and what happened next would change everything. Every contract, every employee, every unspoken rule about who deserves to be taken seriously. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Because this story proves respect doesn't wear a suit, it earns one. The sun sat high over the Swift Logistics dealership lot, casting long shadows behind rows of polished trucks and freshly waxed sedans. Flags fluttered above, catching the light as if the entire place had been built to dazzle. But none of that impressed Marcus Holloway. He'd seen flash before, seen how often it was used to hide something hollow underneath. Dressed in a sweat-drenched black shirt and jeans smeared with warehouse dust, Marcus stepped out of a dented gray van, the same one he'd used that morning to inspect shipments across town. His shoulders ached, but his eyes were sharp, taking in everything, even as no one took him in. Marcus Holloway was the CEO of Swift Logistics, a self-made man who had started as a mechanic with grease under his nails and a dream so loud he could hear it even over the sound of diesel engines. He had built the company from the ground up, but he never forgot where he came from. That's why, every month, without fanfare or formalities, he visited different branches of his empire undercover, not to be admired, but to observe. He believed you could learn more about a company by walking in with silence than with status. Inside the showroom, Tyler and Brent leaned against a high-gloss desk, laughing too loudly, shirts pressed tight. Against gym-toned torsos, Rolex watches glinting as they scrolled on their phones. They were the type of salesmen who knew how to close a deal but not how to open a conversation with someone who looked like they had dirt on their hands. To them, Marcus didn't register. He was background noise, part of the blue-collar buzz they'd learned to tune out unless it waved cash in their faces. Mrs. Allerton was there, too, a longtime customer and self-proclaimed pillar of the community. Dressed in tailored beige and pearls, she hovered around the reception desk, offering critiques no one asked for. When she saw Marcus walk past, she barely concealed her discomfort, turning her nose as if his presence lowered the property value. Marcus walked the lot, unnoticed. His eyes scanned the inventory, not for vehicles, but for behavior. He watched how employees passed by without greeting him, how no one offered help, how Tyler glanced at him and then looked away just as quickly, whispering something to Brent that ended in a smirk. Marcus didn't react. He never did in these moments. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here to see what his name really meant to the people who wore it on their paychecks. To them, he was just another sweaty man looking at a truck he couldn't afford. To Marcus, they were writing a report card in real time. And he was ready to collect the grade. Marcus circled a charcoal gray pickup parked at the edge of the lot, its frame clean, engine freshly detailed, price tag resting like a challenge on the windshield. He leaned in, inspecting the suspension, checking the tires with the trained eye of someone who'd once built vehicles like this from scrap parts. Then he turned, spotted Brent leaning against a desk inside, and walked over. "Excuse me," Marcus said, voice low but polite. "Can you tell me more about the truck out front?" Brent didn't look up from his phone at first, then gave a quick, lazy glance out the window before sizing Marcus up. His eyes flicked over the sweat stains, the faded shirt, the grease smudges. "That one?" he asked, half a smirk curling his lip. "Yeah, probably not in your price range." Marcus blinked slowly but didn't react. "Still," he said, calm and steady, "I'd like to know the specs." Brent sighed, stepping off the desk like a man being inconvenienced. "It's got a turbo diesel, extended cab, top-tier package. Not the kind of thing someone usually starts with. You sure you're looking for a truck and not just browsing?" Marcus nodded. "I'd like to talk financing." That's when Tyler joined in, chuckling as he walked past. "Yeah, might want to check with your boss if you're shopping for the company," he muttered loud enough for a few customers to hear. "Would hate for you to max out someone else's card." Still, Marcus remained composed. He reached into his pocket and he pulled out a folded envelope of cash. "I'm planning to leave a deposit," he said quietly. "Full payment by tomorrow." Brent's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again. "Cash?" he asked, tone skeptical. "You sure? It's not for a down payment on a used van instead?" Marcus ignored the jab. He walked toward the counter to begin the paperwork, but before he could reach it, a sharp voice sliced through the air from behind him. "Surely you're not selling that truck to him?" Mrs. Allerton called out, her voice echoing across the polished showroom floor. "He's probably just casing the place." Everything froze. Tyler went still. Brent looked away. The receptionist stopped mid-typing. A couple of customers nearby glanced up, unsure whether to react or pretend not to hear, but no one said a word. Marcus didn't move at first. He stood completely still, back turned, shoulders square. Then, slowly, he turned around to face her. Mrs. Allerton stood with one hand on her purse and the other on her hip, wearing a look that was equal parts certainty and disgust, as if she were stating a fact, not an insult. Marcus scanned the room. Not one staff member stepped forward. Not one voice corrected her. The silence was thick, not just with shock, but with complicity. The air in the dealership, once filled with forced charm and shallow sales chatter, suddenly held something heavier. And it was in that very moment, watching everyone choose silence, that Marcus decided the test was over. Now, it was time for the lesson. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He didn't even look at Mrs. Allerton for more than a second. Instead, he turned and walked, calmly, deliberately, toward the reception desk. The silence behind him was deafening. Brent and Tyler exchanged stiff glances, their posture tightening, something cold settling in their stomachs as they watched. The man they had written off walk with the ease of someone who'd been here 100 times before. Reaching the front desk, Marcus leaned in and said politely to the young receptionist, "Can you call the general manager, please?" She looked confused for half a beat, then caught something in his tone, an authority deeper than volume. She nodded quickly and picked up the phone. Moments later, the GM arrived from the back office, adjusting his tie, smiling like he was stepping into just another customer interaction. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and flipped it open. In one smooth motion, he produced his ID and held it up for the GM to see. His name in bold beside the logo of Swift Logistics Group. Not just a logo printed on dealership signage, but the parent company. The name that owned every truck in the back lot, every delivery route across the region, and every dealership wearing their badge. The general manager's face dropped. Behind him, Brent took a half-step backward. Tyler's eyes darted from the ID to Marcus's face, as if suddenly seeing him for the first time. Mrs. Allerton, still standing arrogantly near the front window, narrowed her eyes, uncertain but no longer so sure of her ground. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'd like everyone to gather," he said softly. "All sales staff, now." The words carried more weight than a shout ever could. People emerged from corners, stepped away from their computers, silenced their conversations. Soon, every employee stood facing Marcus, their discomfort palpable. Even Mrs. Allerton remained, arms crossed now, not out of confidence but because she had nowhere else to go. Marcus looked around the room slowly, letting the silence do most of the work. Then he spoke. "This visit was a personal audit," he said. "A test. I've been running these unannounced across our regional locations, not to inspect trucks, but to inspect culture." He paused. No one breathed. "I came in today, dressed, as I did when I was 22, working underneath trucks and saving every dollar I had to buy my first set of tools. I came here the way thousands of our customers walk into dealerships across this country, without a suit, without a title on, their chest, just looking to be treated with respect." He looked toward Brent, then Tyler, then Mrs. Allerton. "And what I witnessed here today," he continued, "was not just a lack of professionalism. It was a complete breakdown of the values we claim to stand for: respect, inclusion, service. And I'm not just disappointed. I'm concerned." His eyes scanned the staff again. "Do you know how many people we've turned away before they even parked their cars? How many judged by what they wear, how they speak, what they drive?" No one answered. He turned to the floor manager. "Do you track how many potential clients leave because they're never greeted? Because someone decides who's worth their time?" The manager looked down. Brent shifted his weight, face pale. Tyler wiped invisible dust from his cufflinks. Marcus folded his ID back into his wallet, then slipped it into his pocket. "The trucks in your back lot," he said. "They run on the contracts I sign, the routes you deliver on. My company built those. And the customers you dismissed today?" He gestured to the door. "They look more like me than they do you." Silence. Stretched long and heavy. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. And for the first time in that room, everyone felt it. Marcus let the silence sit for a moment longer before turning his gaze toward Mrs. Allerton. She shifted under the weight of it, her arms now drawn tight across, her chest, that earlier air of superiority slowly draining from her face. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Your fleet contract with Swift Logistics?" he said, each word deliberate. "It's under review. You'll be hearing from my legal team this week." Her mouth opened slightly as if to object, but nothing came out. The entitlement that had once carried her into every room had finally met something it couldn't out-talk: accountability. Then Marcus turned to Brent and Tyler, who now stood like schoolboys caught cheating on an exam. "You judged me by the shirt on my back," he said, his eyes unwavering. "You decided who I was before I said a single word. And now you'll report to someone who wears that shirt every single day." With that, Marcus walked to the office door and waved in a man, standing just outside. In stepped James Monroe, early 40s, in dark overalls, hands still bearing the calluses of a man who spent years turning wrenches instead of turning profits. He looked stunned, humbled. Marcus nodded at him with quiet pride. "This is James," he said. "He was a mechanic at our Tulsa facility. I mentored him years ago. He knows more about these trucks than all of you put together, and as of today, he's your new assistant manager." The shock on the sales floor was audible. Tyler blinked hard. Brent looked like he'd swallowed a stone. James, still taking it in, met Marcus's eyes with disbelief, then gratitude. Marcus continued, now speaking to everyone. "Years ago, I walked into a dealership like this one. Not as a CEO, not even as a manager, just a kid in a clean shirt and dirty boots. Was applying for a junior tech job. The front desk clerk looked me up and down and told me the position had been filled, without even glancing at my resume. I remember walking out that door with my head held high and one thought: one day I'll own the place that turns me away." He paused, letting the words settle. "I bought that shop 7 years later." He looked across the room, then back at James. "This isn't about ego. It's not about proving who's better. It's about breaking cycles, so the next James doesn't need a title to be treated like a human being." Applause didn't follow. Not yet. The moment was too heavy for that. But what did follow was deeper. Reflection. Real, necessary silence from a room that had finally been forced to listen. And in that silence, change took root. In the days that followed, changes came swiftly, and they came from the top. Brent and Tyler were immediately removed from the sales floor, their client access revoked and commissions frozen. There were no dramatic firings, no scenes made. Marcus believed in reform over revenge, and both were sent to retraining under the newly established Customer First Protocol, series of workshops focused not just on sales, but on dignity, unconscious bias, and humility. Whether they'd return afterward would depend not on performance, but on growth. Mrs. Allerton's contract, however, was another matter. Swift Logistics formally withdrew its relationship with her company. The termination letter was polite, professional, but clear. "We do not partner with individuals or entities whose values compromise the dignity of our clients, customers, or community." It was signed by Marcus himself. But the biggest change came behind the scenes. Marcus sat down with every department lead, from operations to HR to regional sales, and launched an internal overhaul, beginning with a mystery shopper ethics audit across every dealership location. No warning, no bias. Just honest, ground-level evaluations to test whether the company's core values were being honored when no one was watching. And leading the first round of diversity and inclusion training, James Monroe, the former mechanic turned assistant manager. Marcus gave him full support to travel store to store, sharing his story, guiding uncomfortable conversations, and helping reshape a culture that had grown too comfortable ignoring the quiet harm of assumption. James didn't teach from a podium, he taught from the workbench. And people listened. Months passed. Then one sunny afternoon, Marcus returned to the same dealership, Same faded black shirt, same van. But everything else had changed. This time, as he stepped through the glass doors, he wasn't met with silence or sideways glances. He was greeted with eye contact, with respect. A receptionist smiled warmly and asked how she could help. A young trainee behind the desk stood when he walked in, ready to assist without judgment. The energy was different, lighter, sharper, more awake. James walked out from the office, clipboard in hand, and clapped him on the shoulder with a grin. "Right on time," he said. Marcus nodded, then turned his gaze to the far end of the showroom where a young janitor was mopping near the entrance. He was no older than 20, earbuds in, quietly humming to himself. James gestured toward him. "That's Aaron," he said. "Bright kid. We've got him shadowing service next week. He's got something." Marcus smiled and walked beside the boy, asking him about school, about trucks, about life. The conversation was short but real, grounded in something often overlooked in places like these: presence. As they walked together across the floor, Marcus glanced around at the very walls that had once echoed with silence. Now they buzzed with awareness, with growth, not perfection, but progress. He turned slightly to James and said, almost to himself, "Respect doesn't wear a badge. It shows up in how you treat the person you think can't do anything for you." And this time, nobody needed to be reminded who he was. They already knew who they were becoming. The trucks still gleamed under showroom lights. The suits still moved through the glass doors with polished shoes and confident strides. But something inside those walls had shifted. Something real. Something lasting. Marcus Holloway hadn't come to prove his worth. That had never been in question. What he needed was for others to prove theirs. Not through numbers, not through smiles when it was convenient, but through how they treated someone they thought couldn't offer them anything at all. He wasn't seeking recognition. He was seeking reflection. And in the discomfort, in the awkward silences, in the choices made after the confrontation, he found it. They thought he was nobody. Just another working man too close to their chrome-plated world. But they didn't realize he built everything they were standing on. Have you ever judged someone because of what they wore? Or watched silently while someone was pushed aside? Respect doesn't come from titles. It doesn't come from cars or contracts. It comes from truth, spoken and unspoken, in every choice you make when no one's watching. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs the reminder. And don't forget to subscribe, because the real test of leadership isn't power, it's presence. Until next time, walk in quietly, but always walk in ready.